In the spring of 1949, in Garza County, West Texas, a farmer named Daniel Carter made a decision that the entire town would talk about for years. He planted sorghum. Not cotton, not wheat, the crop everyone else was rushing to plant as prices climbed after the war. Sorghum. 200 acres of it. The news spread like dry wind across the plains, at the supply store, at the roadside diner, at church on Sunday morning. Everyone was asking the same question. What is Daniel Carter thinking? Sorghum? That is cattle feed. He is throwing away good land. Some people laughed. Some people shook their heads, and some began to whisper. Maybe he has lost his mind. The first man to drive out and see it for himself was Leon Brooks, owner of the largest farm equipment shop in the county. He pulled his dusty pickup to the side of the dirt road and stared out at the field where Daniel was working, slowly guiding an old Alice Chalmers tractor across the soil, planting seed row by row. Leon waited. The tractor stopped. Daniel climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mornin', Leon." Leon did not answer right away. He looked at the field. "You are really doing this?" "Doing what?" "Sorghum." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Leon stepped closer, his voice tightening. "Daniel, everybody around here is planting cotton or wheat. Prices are high. People are making money. And you are doing the opposite of all of them." Daniel looked out across the freshly planted rows. "You want the short answer or the long one?" "I want one that makes sense." Daniel gave a small smile. "The short answer is, my grandfather told me to." Leon frowned. "Your grandfather has been dead a long time. More than 20 years. And you are betting your whole farm on something a dead man told you?" Daniel did not argue. He turned and climbed back onto the tractor. Leon called after him, "You are planting the wrong crop, Daniel. You are going to regret this." The engine roared to life. Daniel did not look back. "Maybe. We will see." But this story did not begin in 1949. It began with an old journal. Daniel's grandfather, Samuel Carter, had survived the harshest years West Texas had ever seen. Years people later called the long, dry years. Not one bad season, but years without rain. The ground cracked open. The wind carried soil for miles. Crops died before they ever had a chance to grow. Samuel watched it all. He watched cotton fail. He watched families pack up and leave in the night. He watched farms disappear after a single season. But he did not leave. In 1938, when almost everything was gone, Samuel did something no one understood. He planted sorghum. Only 15 acres, an experiment born out of desperation. He had read in an old government bulletin that sorghum needed less water, that its roots could reach deeper, that it could survive where other crops failed. That year, when every field around him turned brown, Samuel's sorghum stayed alive. Not a great harvest, not a fortune, but enough. And in those years, enough was everything. Samuel survived. And before he died, he wrote everything down. Not his life story, not memories, but instructions. What worked? What failed? What cost him everything? The last page was a warning. Daniel found that journal one winter afternoon, up in the attic. inside an old wooden trunk covered in dust. He opened it. Inside were the remnants of a life long gone. Photographs, a Bible, a rusted pocket knife, and a leather-bound journal. He opened it and began to read. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. When his wife came looking for him, she found him sitting in the cold, tears in his eyes. "Daniel, what is it?" He handed her the journal. "Read the last page." She read it, then looked at him. "He is talking about drought." Daniel nodded. "Not the kind we are used to." He stood slowly, his voice low. "He is talking about something that wipes everything out. That was a long time ago. The weather does not care what year it is." Daniel held the journal tighter. "My grandfather lived through it, and he wrote down how to survive it." He looked at her. "This time, I am going to listen." That was the night Daniel Carter decided to plant sorghum. Not for profit, not for the market, but because of a warning written by a man who had been dead for over 20 years. The first year, nothing happened. The rains came. Not much, but enough. Enough for wheat, enough for cotton, and more than enough for everyone to say Daniel Carter was wrong. At harvest, the numbers told the story. Wheat prices were high. Cotton yields were strong. Farmers across Garza County made more money than they had in years. And Daniel? Daniel harvested sorghum. A smaller yield, a lower price, just enough to cover his costs. At the diner that fall, the laughter came easy. "We told you, Daniel. Wrong crop. You could have made real money this year." Daniel just nodded. "Maybe next year." But next year came, and he planted sorghum again. Spring of 1950. Same fields, same decision. The county did not laugh quietly anymore. They laughed out loud. "He is doing it again. 2 years now. Throwing money away." Leon Brooks saw it firsthand. He drove past the Carter farm one morning and slowed his truck. There was Daniel. Same old tractor, same straight rows, same crop. Leon shook his head. Stubborn. Or foolish. That year, the rains were better. Wheat did even better than before. Cotton prices climbed. Daniel's sorghum? Still average, still behind. By winter, the nickname had settled in. Wrong crop Daniel. People did not say it to hurt him. Not exactly. They said it the way people talk about someone who just does not understand. At church, the conversation shifted when Dorothy Carter walked in. "I feel bad for her. 2 years now. He just will not listen." Dorothy heard it. She said nothing. But that night, sitting at the kitchen table, she finally asked, "Daniel, are you sure about this?" He did not answer right away. He reached for the journal, the same one he had read in the attic. He opened it slowly, ran his finger across the page. He was sure. just not in the way other men were sure. Not based on price, not based on the market, based on something older, something tested. The drought does not come all at once. That was what the journal said. It creeps in, year by year, rain by rain, and by the time people notice, it is already too late. Daniel looked at his wife. I am not waiting for it to be obvious. I am getting ready before it comes. Dorothy studied his face. There was no doubt there, only quiet certainty, and that scared her more than anything. Spring of 1951. Daniel planted sorghum again. 3 years now. 3 years of being wrong. 3 years of watching everyone else move ahead. New equipment appeared across the county. New trucks. New barns. Farmers were expanding, taking loans, buying more land. And every time Daniel drove past those farms, he saw the same thing. Confidence, certainty, and debt. He did not say anything. He just kept planting. That summer, something changed. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. The rain came later, and it did not stay as long. The soil dried faster than it should have. Wheat still grew, cotton still held, but not like before. Not quite as strong, not quite as easy. At the diner, the conversation shifted. Just a dry year, nothing to worry about, happens all the time. Daniel said nothing. But that night, he opened the journal again, and this time, he did not stop at the last page. He went back to the beginning, reading slower, looking for the signs. The same signs his grandfather had written about. Late rain, short seasons, soil losing moisture too fast. He closed the book, and for the first time, he felt it. Not doubt, not fear, recognition. It had started, and no one else could see it yet. By the spring of 1952, people began to notice. Not all at once, not in a way that made headlines, but in small things, the kind of things farmers feel before they understand. The soil did not hold moisture the same way. It dried faster. The wind felt different, hotter, sharper. The rain came late, and when it came, it did not stay. At the supply store, the talk started to change. Just a dry spell, happens every few years, nothing to worry about. But the older men did not speak as quickly. They had seen something like this before. Not exactly, but close enough. Daniel Carter planted sorghum again. 4th year. No hesitation, no change. By now, nobody tried to convince him anymore. They just watched. Wrong crop, Daniel. That was what they called him. Not with laughter anymore. Not entirely. There was something else in it now. Something quieter. Something closer to unease. That summer the heat came early. June felt like August. The sky stayed empty. Day after day, week after week. The wheat fields began to change color, not the golden color of harvest, but something dull, something brittle. Farmers walked their fields in silence. They knelt down, picked up dry soil, let it fall through their fingers. Too light, too loose, no moisture left. The cotton held a little longer, but even that began to struggle. Leaves curled, growth slowed. At night, the conversations changed. Not at the diner, not in public, at kitchen tables, behind closed doors. What if this keeps going? What if the rain does not come? What if this is not just a dry year? Daniel walked his fields one evening as the sun dropped low over the horizon. The sorghum was not perfect. The leaves showed stress. The growth was slower than it should have been. But it was alive, standing, holding on. He looked across the fence line at the neighboring wheat field, brown, uneven, struggling to survive. Daniel did not smile. There was no satisfaction in being right, only a quiet weight. He had seen this before, not with his own eyes, but through someone else's, through words written years ago. He went back to the house that night and opened the journal again. This time he did not search. He knew where to look. The middle pages, the ones most people would skip, the slow years, the years when everything still looked normal but was not. He read about the signs: late rain, short growing seasons, crops that looked fine until they weren't. He closed the journal and sat in silence. Dorothy watched him from across the room. "You think it is happening." It was not a question. Daniel nodded. "It already has." Outside, the wind picked up, dry, hot, carrying dust across the fields. And for the first time in years, the people of Garza County began to understand something was wrong. But understanding and being ready are not the same thing. By August of 1952, the difference could no longer be ignored. It was no longer a bad season. It was a failure. Across Garza County, wheat fields collapsed, not gradually, not quietly, but all at once. Heads that should have been heavy with grain hung empty. Stalks that should have stood tall bent under their own weakness. Farmers walked their land in disbelief. Some tried to harvest anyway, hoping for something, anything. But there was nothing, just dry husks and broken expectations. At the grain elevator, the silence was louder than any machine. Trucks did not line up. There were no long waits, no arguments over price, only a handful of deliveries, and most of them were light, too light. The manager stopped writing numbers after a while. There was no point. Everyone already knew. It was the worst yield in years. Some said decades. Others did not say anything at all. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter harvested his sorghum. Not a perfect crop, not a record, but a harvest. Real grain, full heads, weight in the truck. He brought it to the same elevator, parked in the same place, walked the same steps, but this time no one laughed. The scale operator looked at the load, then at Daniel, then back at the grain. Sorghum. Daniel nodded. The man let out a slow breath. We might have to check the price. Haven't handled much of this lately. Take your time. Minutes later, the operator came back. Something had changed. The number was higher than anyone expected. Feed buyers were calling. Other regions were failing too. Supply was shrinking. Demand was rising. Sorghum, the crop no one wanted, suddenly mattered. Daniel did not react. He had not planted for price. He had planted for survival. But survival has a way of becoming profit. By the end of harvest, the numbers were clear. Most farms in the county lost money. Some lost everything. Daniel made enough. Enough to cover costs. Enough to save. Enough to keep going. And that was more than enough. The conversations changed again. At the diner, at the feed store, at church. Not jokes anymore, questions. How did you know? Why sorghum? Why 4 years? Daniel gave the same answer every time. My grandfather wrote it down. Some nodded. Some didn't understand. But nobody laughed. Not anymore. That fall, the first foreclosure notice appeared on a mailbox at the edge of town. Then another. Then another. Banks had waited. They always waited. Until they didn't. And when they moved quickly. Equipment auctions were scheduled. Land evaluations began. Men who had farmed their whole lives stood in their own fields and realized they did not own them anymore. Daniel watched it happen, not from a distance, but from the same road, the same community. These were not strangers. They were neighbors, friends, men who had laughed with him and at him. Now they did neither. One evening, Virgil Tate drove out again. Same truck, same road, different man. He stepped out slowly. No smile, no confidence, just wait. You were right. Daniel shook his head. No, I just listened. Virgil looked out across the sorghum field, the only field in sight that had made it through. I should have listened too. Daniel did not answer, because sometimes being right comes too late. By the spring of 1953, the drought had not ended. It had settled in, like something permanent, something that was not going away anytime soon. The county looked different now. Fields that once fed families sat quiet. Equipment yards were full, but not with new machines, with repossessed ones. Tractors, plows, combines, all lined up, waiting for buyers. Most never came, because the people who needed them were the same people losing everything. Banks did what banks always do. They collected, they listed, they sold, and land started changing hands. Quietly at first, then faster. Daniel Carter had money. Not a fortune, but something rare in that year. Cash. He did not rush. He did not celebrate, because he understood something most people didn't. This was not opportunity. This was loss. Other people's loss. The first farm he bought was 120 acres just west of his land. The owner was a man named Earl Simmons, third-generation farmer, gone in one season. Daniel did not bargain hard. He paid more than the bank expected, more than anyone else offered, because he remembered something his grandfather had written. When hard times come, don't become the kind of man who profits from another man's fall. By the end of 1954, Daniel owned 400 acres. By 1956, it was 700. Not by force, not by greed, but by patience and timing, and the simple fact that he was still standing, while others were not. But something else changed too. People started coming to him, not to laugh, not to question, but to ask, "What should we plant? What should we do now?" Daniel never raised his voice, never said, "I told you so." He just walked them to his barn, opened the drawer, and took out the journal. He let them read, line by line, year by year, drought, failure, survival, and one sentence underlined twice: plant before the drought comes, not after. After is too late. Some listened, some didn't, but the ones who listened survived. By 1960, Garza County looked different again, not like before. It never goes back, but stable, balanced. Fields were mixed now. Sorghum, drought-resistant crops, less risk, more thought. Daniel Carter was no longer the man who planted the wrong crop. He had a different name now, the man who saw it coming. But Daniel never claimed that, because he knew the truth. He didn't see anything. He just listened. Years later, in 1971, Daniel did something unexpected. He sat down with the same journal, the one wrapped in cloth, the one that had waited decades, and he added a new chapter. My grandfather wrote this in 1912. I found it in 1948. I trusted it in 1949. And it saved everything. He paused, then wrote one more line. If you are reading this, the drought is coming again. Maybe not this year, maybe not soon, but it will come. And when it does, you will not have time to prepare. He closed the journal and placed it back exactly where he found it, waiting for the next person who is willing to listen. Daniel Carter died in 1983. He never became the richest man in the county, but he became something else. The man people trusted, the man people remembered, the man who proved that being early looks exactly like being wrong until it doesn't. And somewhere in an old farmhouse, in a quiet drawer, a journal still waits with the same warning: the drought will come again. It always does. The only question is, will you listen before it's too late?